Lamed Vav Lamed Beis on the bottom. Ton Rabbanim Ein Oifin Pasava B'Yontav Pesach. You cannot bake a thick matzah on Pesach. Dibber Beis Shammai. Ubeis Hillel Matirin. Beis Hillel permits. Kama Pasava. How thick can you bake it? On Ravuna Tefach. Shkein Matirin B'Lechem Aponim Tefach. Because the Lechem Aponim, which also had to be a matzah, couldn't be chametz, could be as thick as a tefach. So I'm asking Rav Yosef, Im Amru B'Zrizin, that's not a proof. The lechem aponim was done by kohanim or as reason. So they'll prevent it from becoming chametz. Yomru B'Shein Zrizin. How can we say thing by people that are at home? Im Amru B'Pasamela, the dough for the lechem aponim was worked very hard, and it didn't become like they Rav says 300 times it was beaten and 500 times it was rolled. So this prevented it from becoming chametz. Yom B'Pashein Amela, could we say the same thing with a dough at home? In Omer Beis Yaveshin, not only that, but in the Beis Hamikdash, they had very dry wood. They would not accept, after Tu B'Av, they would not accept any wood. So the wood that they had was very dry. Therefore, the wood that they used to bake the menachos in the Beis Hamikdash was the oven was very hot, and therefore would prevent the dough from becoming chametz. Yomer Beis and Lachim. But householders, balabatim, use, they don't use such dry wood. Im Omer B'Tanur Cham, right? The Beis Hamikdash had a very hot oven. Yomer B'Tanur Tzonin. Relatively, the ovens that were in the homes were not as hot. Im Omer B'Tanur Shel Mateches, the Beis Hamikdash used a metal oven. Yomer B'Tanur Shel Cheres. But in the Beis Hamikdash, they in a home, they usually used earthenware ovens. So for all these reasons, the lechem aponim had a right to be a tefach, but the matzah baked at home should not be. On Rav Yirmiyah bar Ava, she'ilas is Rebbe b'yichud. I asked Rebbe quietly, Umanu Rav, who was my Rebbe Rav? Ikadiyami Rav Yirmiyah bar Ava, Rav she'ilas is Rebbe b'yichud Umanu Rabbeinu HaKadosh. I asked them, my pas ava, pas meruba doesn't mean the thickness of the matzah. It means we were allowed on Yontif to bake many breads. I might correlate pas ava. Well, why is that called a thick bread? Mishum de nefisha belisha, because you made a huge dough, and that ended up making many breads. The boys say, other people say, that in the neighborhood where they many breads, they call pasava. Now, my time. Now, what would be the problem in baking many loaves, where here we were given a permission to bake many loaves? What is it? A tirchi yiser my ear Pesach? Then if you're going to tell me that we were given a heter to bake many loaves on Yontif, then it had nothing to do with Pesach. It could be with any Yontif. Afilu b'Yontif nami. So the Gemara says, Einach nami. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about Pesach only. We're talking about every Yontif. But this Tana happened to be discussing the rules of Pesach, so he mentioned it here. But really, this has nothing to do with the thickness of the loaves. We're taught that it's better to make a lot of loaves, because they also understood that when you bake many loaves in an oven, the baking is better, because it's hotter and the breads that are made are better. It doesn't say Pesach, it says Yontif in general. Your Yotze for matzah, if the flour is very white, Uvahadra, which we said was whole grain. Uvesrikin amatsuyar bepesach. This was a matzah that was decorated. They painted like some kind of decoration on it. Even though it's been said that you shouldn't make these kind of decorative matzahs on Pesach. Baitus asked the Chachamim, they mamru enois nefrikta mitzvah Pesach. How come we don't make these kind of matzahs? It takes a while for the housewife to make the decorations on the matzah. Meanwhile, the matzah becomes chametz, so we make a practice not to do it. But they could use a form, like a press, and would take a second. It wouldn't take a long time. But then it's a little, they're going to say, oh, other ones, we're not going to be able to tell which one of these decorative matzahs were made with a press versus ones that are not. So it's a little clue. We went into the house of Rabbi Gamliel. They brought him these decorative matzahs. How can you have these? Didn't the Chachamim say Einois and Srikin of Mitzvah Pesach? Omer lebni lo kol shel adam amru ela shel nachtonim amru. Balabatim could make them. Bakers who make for the public, and they have to make a lot of it. Therefore, there's a risk that it could become chametz. They answered it for bakers. Now, ikidiyami, other people say learn pumfak here. Bakers are expert. They do it very quickly, and for them it's not a problem. It won't become chametz. Ela shel kol adam. They answered the court of matzahs that were made by people at home. You can make very thin wafers. They know some srikin can glucose, but not thick loaves. The halach is we don't make any of these decorative matzahs. You can make small little holes in the matzah like we have, so that helps preventing from becoming chametz. Now, those of us who learned, just so happened, who learned the dinim of challah in the Tzurim Rabbanon Shiurim the last couple of weeks, will see that there's an analogy, the same, that means that a dough that is chayiv in matzah is also chayiv in challah. Means when you make a dough, you have to give challah to the kohen. It's like truma. And we'll see certain types of breads are not chayiv challah. If you make a thick dough and you bake it, everyone holds it as chayiv challah. If it's a thin batter and you don't bake it, but you fry it or you boil it, then there are shittas that doesn't require challah. And this is the source gemara for Ton Rabbanon. Hasukanim, which is like a sponge bread. Hadufshanim, like a honey cake. The iskritin,
wafers.
Yeah, Rashi says very thin. The chalas hamasres, the Gemara will tell us what that is. The meduma is a mixture of chulin and truma, not enough to be mavatalit. So the din is it's of truma, and the din is truma. A dough made of truma is not chayiv and challah; it's already owned by the kohen. In all these cases, p'tur min hachallah. My chalas hamasres. What is this chalas hamasres? Amish ben Levi. Zecholut shel balibati. They scald the flour before they bake it, so it makes it more white. And this would be p'tur min hachallah. Reish Lakish halalu ma'aseh ilfaseh. Reish Lakish says, you know why all the ones mentioned above are potter from challah? Because they're not baked; they're fried in a pan. However, Rabbi Yochanan says that if you fry it in a pan, it's still chayiv challah. So what makes this potter? Halal shason b'challah. These were baked under the sun.
By the way, he says that they're not fried; they're boiled, Ernie. He says it's boiled, the pot boiled.
Okay, cooked. Cooked in a pan, right? Yeah, bishul.
Pot boiled. Yeah.
It's not considered lechem. Lechem is only if it's baked in an oven. Meisvei asukonim, the sponge bread vaduvshanim vaskritin, and these wafers. So ason beilfis, if you cooked it in a pan, like we said, chayovim.
And those are pan fried.
Yeah, but they're above the same. It's the same sheet above as well. That means they're not baked. They're either
Fried.
cooked.
They're fried.
We're gonna see when you fry something in oil, it's considered bishul. If you cook it in water, it's also bishul. Now we're gonna see also that when sometimes you can fry it with very little liquid. There was some shitas that would hold that might require challah. But if there's a lot of if the way we fry, deep frying, that would certainly be called bishul. So we have a brisa that says if you made it be'ilfas chayovin, which is going to be a kasha on Reish Lakish, who said the reason why the above were potter because it was my silfus, right? B'chama p'tor tiyufta Reb Shimon ben Lakish Amar Ula. Ula will explain on behalf of Reish Lakish Amar Reb Shimon ben Lakish Ach Ma'askinon shehir tiach uvasof hidbik. That means if you heated up the pan first, so it's hot, and then you stuck the dough against the side of the pan, in a chanami, it would be osir, and it would be chayiv chal. Aval hidbik, but if you stuck it to the side of the pan while it was cold, and then only later heat it up, my chanami de p'turim. So Reish Lakish would hold that it would be pot. However, the Gemara says, what do you mean? Adatani seifa. If that's the case, why did you wait until the seifa to say asah b'chama p'turim? That the case of a p'tur is when you did it in the sun. If you're correct, liflog v'lisnei b'didei. You should have argued about hidbik l'vasafir tiach would also be potter. When do we say it's chayiv chalak because tiach l'vasaf hidbik? You heated up the pan, then you stuck the dough onto the side. Aval hidbik, but if you stuck it on when it was cold v'safir tiach p'turim, and yet it didn't say it that way, so perhaps your approach is your teretz for Reish Lakish is not correct. So the Gemara says really chasur mechzer v'achitani. There was some words missing in the Baraisa you quoted. And this is I have to quote. It's like you said. When do we say it's chayiv chala shir tiach l'sav hidbik? That you heated up the oven or the pan and then stuck the dough there. In a chanami, that would be considered like baking. It'd be chayiv chala. Aval hidbik l'sav tiach. But if you stuck it to the walls while it was cold and only later heated up, so nasa kamisha son b'chama, this is like something that was heated up in the sun, uptur, and it would be potter. So that's how Ula gets Reish Lakish out of trouble based on that price. Toshma, yoitzin b'matzah hina. Matzah hina is like raw matzah. It's not fully baked. Uva matzah sui be'ilfas. And matzah that was also either that it's called lechem. Even if you cook it in this frying pan, fry it without much fluid, it's called lechem, and therefore you could be yotzei matzah. Achanami. So this seems again to go against what Reish Lakish said before, that if it's ma'aseh ilfis, that's why there was a potter from challah. Well, if it's potter from challah, it's not a lechem. It can't be used for lechem, only for matzah. So the Gemara says, "Achanami shir tiach l'sof hidbik." This is also a case where we all agreed that if you heat it up and then put the dough in, then achanami would be considered like baking, and it would be chayiv challah, and you'd be able to use it for your matzah mitzvah. So the Gemara wants to know my matzah hina. What is this raw matzah? It's raw so that when you pull the matzah apart, you see it's stringy. And it's like mozzarella cheese that strings out, it's still attached to the matzah. The loaves that were made with the for the korban toda, you have to bring 40 loaves. As long as you baked it up until that degree, once you baked to that degree and you shechted the korban toda, the lechem is nigdash. So even if you got it to matzah hina status, it'll work for the lachmei toda.
How can you, how can you,
Pshita,
how can you bring a Torah on the Pesach? Because you have to have 12.
you can't bring, we're not talking about Pesach. We're talking about Lachmei Toda that are brought all year. You can't bring a Korban Toda on
Because
Pesach.
you have Chomer, you have 12, you have to have 12 Chomers.
10 of the loaves are chametz.
Right. So this
So
is
you
not,
don't bring, we're not talking about Pesach here. We're talking
yes,
about
I
the
just,
rest of the year.
so we don't have,
But
of course, that's why we can't have Torah on Pesach. Yeah.
you can't have Toda on Pesach. And we're talking about that when you shecht the Korban, the Chalois are Nigdash if they've gotten to that degree of baking. That's what it means, the Chei Lachmei Toda. Afraid to Gemara, what do you mean? Pshita, achal lechem ksiv, achal lechem ksiv. They're both called lechem. Well, why should we have a havamina and not? Ma'od the same whole ksiv kriv mi menu. Echad mikol kurban. Echad shelo yitol parts. You cannot use like a half of matzah. You can't use a piece. And maybe a half-baked matzah is command prisadanya. It's considered like it's a half. And maybe you would have a havamina that it's not called lechem. Kamash Balon that no, that it would work there. Beisvei, ask you another kasha. Hami'isa, which is again dough that was scalded in hot water. So Beishamai poitrin from challah. Ubeisel machayvin. And then hachalita, which is also some kind of scalding of the flour. Beishamai, and you make bread with it. Beishamai will be machayiv yuchala. Beisel poitrin. Eza hami'isa ve'eza chalita. What is which? Hami'isa kemach she'al gabi miguloshin. Means flour that was placed on top of boiling water. Hachlita is mugloshin shal gabi kemach. I guess the water is placed on top of the flour for chlita. Rishon Rabbi Yossi Omer Mishum Aviv. Zev v'zeh liftur. Both are potter and challah. The army law zev v'zeh lechiyuv. Others say no, both are chayiv challah. The Chachamim Moimim say it depends. Echad zev ason be'ilfis. If you made it in a pan, potter. The tanur, if you baked it in an oven, chayiv challah. The Tanakama Maishna Me'isa Maishna Chalita. Now, that we have. So, what is the Tanakama? Why does he make a difference? And say, and that in a sense that one is potter and one is chay. Amir Rabbi Shmuel, B'chanam Rabbi Yehuda V'Yitei Rabbi Shmuel ben Levi, K'machlokas Bezu Kach Machlokas Bezu. It's a Machlokas Tanoim at the beginning, as it is in the end. V'tav Misha Shana Zu Lo Shana Zu. The one who learned the ratio didn't learn the same. Whatever you want to say, Ktoni Mias. The Chachamim Moimrim, Echad Zeh V'Echad Zeh, Shason Be'ilfis, is like Reish Lakish, Potter. Remember? Reish Lakish explained the Baraisa that we mentioned about Sufganim and Duvshanim and all those that are Potter because they're Maisa Ilfis. And Rabbi Yochanan said, Maisa Ilfis is Chai. Well, here it's very clear that the Chachamim said that if you baked it Be'ilfis Potter, in Challah, B'taner Chayiv, to Yufted Rav Yochanan. So now we ask the Kasha Rav Yochanan. Harloch Rav Yochanan, fine, Tanoi, I'll show you Machlokas Tanoi, that holds like me, and I hold like that Tana, the Tanya. Yachol Yeh Me'isa V'chaluta Chayiv B'challah, I might think that this Me'isa or Chaluta process to the flour, and you bake bread with it, you'd be Chayiv Challah, Tabadom Lechem. And this is not Lechem. Rav Yudah ain't Lechem Ela Afui B'Tanu. Frank Gamor, what do you mean? Rabbi Yudah and Tanakh sounds like they're saying the same thing. Elala, my sealfis, it could be nice. No, baking it in the frying pan in that ilfis process is the daf gemina. Tanakh sorry, my sealfis chayavim, like Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yudah sorry, my sealfis pturin, which is like Reish Lakish. So the Gemara wanted to answer up for Rabbi Yochanan, the tiyufta, to say that Rabbi Yochanan is following the Machlekes Tanoim. Of course, there's law. There's no Machlekes Tanoim here. Kulam and myself is Turi. If you bake it be'ilfis, it's potter and challah. So what's the Machlekes here? Hacha. After you did the ilfis, You went ahead, you went ahead and baked it again in the oven. Since in the end you baked it, it's called lechem, and therefore you'll be chayiv and chal. Rav Yudah sorei lechem elafui b'tana mikar. Not called lechem, unless it was baked in the oven from the beginning, not through an ilfis process first. The kivan to mikar lav b'tana afya. It wasn't baked originally. It's lav lechem, it's not considered lechem. Omer of my time at Rav Yehuda. Why does Rav Yehuda hold that it's not lechem unless it's afui b'tana mikar? T'chsiv va'afu eser nashim lachmechem b'tanur echad. This is in the Tochacha, in Parshas Bechukosai. It says 10 women are going to break their bread in one oven. But we darshan halacha from it. Lechem afui b'tanur echad. If it's baked in an oven, kori lechem. B'she'ein afui b'tanur echad. If it's baked in multiple stages, not in one tanur, ain't kori lechem. Okay. Yosef Rav Yosef Achoyd Rav Zeira. Rav and Rav Yosef were sitting behind Rav Zeira. Yep. Yosef Rav Zeira kamedu. Rav Zeira was sitting in front of Ula. Amarli Rav and Rav Zeira. Boy mi name Ula. They asked from Ula like this. Hidbik mi bifnim. They stuck the dough into the pot or pan on the inside. The hirtiach mi bachutz. And they lit a fire on the outside, like we would do. Amarli mayim alei. What would you say? Are you going to ask, is this Maisi Ilfis? No, not that you put a dough in a pan and you put the fire below the pan. No, you put the dough in the pan and then the fire is placed on top of it, like broiling. Omerlei. Ma emalei, what should I say? In fact, this is the way most poor people bake a maisi ofis because they don't have eitzim, and therefore it bakes quicker. Amar Ravasi, Isa shel meiser sheni, l'divrei Rab Meir. A dough that is made from produce of meiser sheni, according to Rab Meir, would be p'tur v'nacham. Rab Meir is going to hold that Meiser Sheni is like Hegdish. Even though Bailim can use it, it's not that considered their personal rechush, and therefore would be potter from Chala. But the Divrei Chachamim will hold that Meiser Sheni is Mom and Hedyot, is personal financial asset, then they'll hold Chayeves B'Chala. Because it says, Ari Soy Seichem, your dough. And Rameir holds that Meiser Sheni is Mom and Gavo, it's not yours. So therefore it would be potter from Chala.
Do we
Hey,
have
Shkoya.
is baking, does the baking have to be within 18 minutes, or the dough sitting before it gets baked has to be less than 18 minutes? Is there a shear of how long you're allowed to leave it in the oven for? Does it rise once?
It's got to cook quicker than that.
So in other words,
that flour and water with 18 minutes will leaven it. The process has to be much quicker.
So can you, when he bakes it in one keli, then puts another, bakes in the pan and puts in the oven, this all has to be done within the
Correct.
time?
Correct. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's not considered lechem. It would be potter from